Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Jake from FA Health Centers, and we are going to talk a lot about what's been a question that's been coming into the office all the time, especially recently, especially since the whole last 2 years of COVID and whatnot. This is now a question that's pretty readily asked in our office, and to me all the time by a lot of my patients, and that is viruses. Why can certain viruses come back, or what is this latency period, or why do they re-pop up, and how are they capable of doing that? How is a virus capable of hiding in your body? And so we're just going to talk about some basic physiology today and why, and things that you can do to kind of minimize those risk factors of previous viruses popping back up. So if you have any questions, go ahead and pop them down below. Let us know as I go through this. This won't be the longest live this morning. Because going into virology can be a little bit of a black hole. We can kind of dive really, really deep. But my goal is not to go too deep with physiology. It's really to help people just understand some of the basic principles of why viruses can actually go latent, and then what's going to happen and how we can prevent them from popping back up and causing a reinfection. So essentially, when you have a virus at whatever point in your life, there are certain viruses that are really, really good at hiding out. Now that hiding out period is called the latent phase. And that's essentially where the virus isn't actively replicating. It kind of coats itself in this little protein structure and just hangs out in your cell and hides around a few different little organelles. Because a lot of people think of a cell just kind of like high school biology. You have 5 or 6 little organelles in there, and it's a very basic structure. But what we don't realize is the cell is actually incredibly complex. It is more like New York City and Times Square. There are just hundreds and hundreds of things going on at one time. It's actually a very, very complex unit. But what winds up happening is during what's called the lytic phase, a virus, that's the active infection. What a virus does is it goes down into your cell. It takes over or hijacks your nucleus, where a lot of your DNA is and where a lot of your genes are. And it actually, instead of coding your own DNA and building proteins and structures, it slides its own DNA in there and says, hey, make more viruses for me. And what happens is your own cellular machinery codes that gene and starts replicating more viruses until it builds up, the cell builds up with a ton of them, and they get released. And when they get released, it rips the cell open, which is why it's called the lytic phase, because lysis is basically the cutting open or the splitting open of a cell. So if it's not actively in the lytic phase, there's certain viruses that have a really, really high propensity or really high efficiency to basically reactivate certain viruses. Because there are certain viruses, EBV is a really, really, really common one. Certain strains of the adenovirus, certain strains of cytomegalovirus, certain STD type viruses, and we can actually talk about the third type phase is what's called the persistent infection, and those are things like the herpes simplex viruses and the HSV and things like that. They're really, really common for being able to kind of shift from cell to cell and actually produce a very, very slow, constant infection. It's actually slow enough that it never produces a massive lytic phase, which is why you can basically essentially be active for years and years at a time and not have the active symptoms, because you're producing just enough of the virus that it can spread, and you don't know that your partner or whoever has it, or that they gave it to you, or that you gave it to someone else. So what happens in this reactivation phase? So there's a good question from Colleen. COVID reactivated EBV, and this is all over the place. This happens all the time. So EBV, those viruses, that family, is quite notorious for its ability to go latent. So essentially what happens, and there's several research articles on how this happens in the projected theories. We don't know 100% the absolute mechanism, but we know a lot of ones that definitely play into it. So one of the ones is when your immune system essentially has to shift its gaze. I like to compare it to a game of cat and mouse. Your immune system is the cat. Even inside each individual cell, you have very, very specific proteins, very, very specific organelles. Their whole job is to monitor the health of the cell. And when the health of the cell starts going haywire, whether that's viral infection, whether that's cancerous growth, anything like that, they're supposed to flag the immune system, and then those bigger white blood cells and platelets and stuff like that come into the cell and actually destroy the cell before it's able to actually spread. That's happening on, and I'm not joking, a constant basis, okay? That process is constantly happening in your body night and day, whether you have an active infection or not. People don't realize how many viruses and bacteria and things we are fighting constantly. Everyone in the world basically has cancer cells, but our immune system's really good at keeping that at bay. However, when you have a virus like the SARS strains of a coronavirus, which there are more than one, the most recent one was kind of COVID, they have a particular affinity to be able to attack nervous tissue. Now, they're not the only virus that can, and they also attack other things. We know respiratory tissue and other things like that. But their ability to get into the nervous tissue makes them kind of a priority number one for our immune system. And when that priority number one enters our immune system says, look, I'm going to drop everything I'm working on, and I'm going to focus on this guy. That averting of your gaze, that cat and mouse where the cat says, ooh, I have something more important to go focus on, that allows the mouse to see the opportunity of, hey, I'm not being monitored. So guess what? I'm going to pop back up. I'm going to take over the cellular machinery, and I'm going to go from latent phase back into lytic phase. So it's essentially the immune system's prioritization or the lack of the immune system to handle multiple things at once. That can be anything from you actually have an underlying autoimmune condition and your body's just really good at compensating it. Then something a little bit more important comes along. It says, dropping that compensation, I'm going to come here. So when you go to pick this back up, it's almost like you're fighting an active infection again. That's actually one of the signs, some of the most common, one of the most common things that we're seeing in our office, and that's happening in a lot of the offices and doctors that we talk to, are people that had an underlying condition maybe 5-10 years ago. They felt it was resolved. But here's the trick. Your body is absolutely incredible at compensation. It's amazing at what it can juggle. But all of a sudden, when priorities shift, when you get this kind of really intense virus like what we had, when that priority shifts, your body decides to say, okay, what's worse? I have to focus on priority survival. And it's been keeping this one thing at bay. So it says, okay, I'm going to drop that. For example, EBV. I'm going to drop that. Monitoring that virus is high, and I'm going to dedicate all of my resources into focusing on this. So the people that fare the best with this are the ones that have that really competent immune system. They're not dealing with the chronic inflammation. They're not dealing with that brain fog type stuff. They're not dealing with kind of pseudo autoimmune conditions. Their liver is able to remove trash, and their liver is also able to really, really teach the immune system. And this is another thing, because we work with the liver on a lot of our patients, and people need to understand that your liver is the university for your immune system. When your immune cells come out of the bone marrow and they're young and immature and they're trying to learn what to do, they go to the liver and they have what's called antigen presentation, where the liver basically says, hey, look, these are all the things that our body's made of. Don't attack these. These are all the things that we've been exposed to, whether that's viruses, whether that's bacteria, whether that's parasites, like whatever we have, these are bad things and you need to attack these. Well, if your liver's backed up, if it's not running phase 1, phase 2 metabolism well, if you're having chronic inflammation or respiratory issues, or if you're having chronic digestive issues, that puts an enormous amount of extra load on the liver to help process all that. And what winds up happening is we don't get that antigen presentation as clear, or we have these naive young white blood cells going out in circulation without the tools equipped to know what they're supposed to fight. So your immune system gets weakened over time. So what winds up happening is once that immune system gets weakened over time, because you have more and more uneducated white blood cells, the chance for you to have a relapse in an old virus starts to increase, especially when you get a really serious virus or really serious sickness. It feels like all the progress that you made over the years was for nothing. So it's really just this dance, and this is why I always use the analogy of the cat and mouse type game. It's because it's really, really important to understand that there's this almost constant balance back and forth between your immune system being able to monitor and the virus being able to hide inside the cell. Okay, and these are very simple things. These are things that we've talked about, like glutathione mechanisms and NF-kappa beta and antigen presentation and sensitization reactions and virus patch mechanisms. And a lot of those things that people may not have even heard about, these are some of the really fundamental things we try to start working on. This is what really we try to differentiate ourselves, is we start walking back and not just saying, take this for your highs, take this for your lows. That's good short term, but then we have to ask the deeper question for long term, which is where and why is this virus able to basically come back and stay back? So I have Hashimoto's, just had COVID for the second time, now dealing with fatigue every day, no energy. Yes, Rachel, so this is essentially classic. And once again, this is exactly how I describe it to patients. Your body had some underlying things going on that it was really good at compensating with, but it was kind of reaching the limit of how much it could juggle, okay? Then something rather serious comes on and your immune system has to reprioritize what's going on internally, and so does your nervous system. Because remember, your immune response isn't totally just white blood cells and platelets and things like that. It's actually a heavy response by your neurologic system. It helps control and coordinate the immune response. So what winds up happening is you're sitting here juggling and feeling like, you know, I'm doing fairly well in life. You get hit with once and then twice, and your body's like, look, I can't go back and juggle like I was. It's getting really hard for me to pick up these pieces. So we see these subtle neurologic symptoms where I have no energy, I can't think at all, my brain fog's gone. And essentially what winds up happening is your ability to probably re-amplify or re-educate your immune system is now compromised. And so we have to go in, and that's why we do a lot of all the testing that we do with our initial patients, and we go through the 9.5 panels that we run, because we want to analyze as many fundamental body systems as possible. And when we analyze those fundamental body systems, we can start getting answers of where is the body just wiped out? Where is it depleted? Where is it not working to allow your immune system not to bounce back? And that's what we're seeing a lot with a lot of people. And the good news is a lot of patients that come into us, it starts taking them the first month or two, they're starting to see it finally turn around. The hair is coming back, their energy's back, their brain fog starts decreasing. It's because it's not just chasing the virus, it's why can't your body bounce back? And it's usually, for the vast majority of the time, is the immune system did not have the capability, or it was already so distracted before, it's really just hard to pick that juggling thing back up. And Rachel, you kind of responded again, taking NAC, which has helped, and castor oil pack on my liver. So yeah, that's really good stuff. NAC is a molecule that helps us recycle a bigger molecule called glutathione. The trick with glutathione, though, a lot of people have started to learn about glutathione. It's one of the body's primary antioxidants. It's a really, really big player with the immune system. And the cool thing about glutathione is it also is a molecule that's inside our cell. It's one of those molecules that helps us monitor the interior of the cell and make sure everything's operating appropriately. And if it's operating appropriately, it makes sure that cell stays healthy. If the cell isn't appropriate, say it's dysfunctional, it's old, it's infected, what happens is glutathione in a molecule called NF-kappa beta, it runs up to the immune system, it wiggles itself through the cell wall, and it provides a flag and says, hey guys, I'm not operating well. So glutathione and NF-kappa beta actually have this really fantastic relationship, helping us balance the internal environment of the cell. NAC is something that can really help that glutathione recycle and become more effective. The problem is glutathione recycling is actually a multi-step process, and that's why some people, they may be short on the N-acetylcysteine, which is NAC, that NAC portion, but some people are short on the other 2 or 3 portions, or one of the other 2 or 3. And that's why they take NAC and they're like, well, I'm not feeling the effect that my friend felt. Well, that's because part of that conversion process to make glutathione, a really viable molecule, you're deficient on a totally different part of that. So yeah, I'm a big fan of NAC, not against it at all, but for those people that it doesn't work for, and when NAC does help you, especially if you're a female, we have to understand that glutathione is part of the process for you to clear out the trash from hormone metabolism or hormone usage and breakdown. And this is why it's really, really important for females to kind of understand this, because you produce an enormous amount, especially relative to men, of hormones. You produce them at a higher concentration, and your estrogens release or have metabolites or breakdown products, what I like to call hormone trash, stuff you can't use once hormones are broken apart, that you have to kick out of the body. Some of those pieces of trash are actually really scary. So 4-hydroxyestrone is really a really scary piece of trash that if you don't kick it out of the body, it can cause cysts and growths and cancers and fibrosis and just a lot of female issues. And guess what? Glutathione is actually a big part to that puzzle of removing that piece of trash out of the body. So if you're deficient, a lot of these same women that are coming into us and saying, hey, yeah, COVID kicked my bum, and now I'm having all sorts of hormone issues on top of this. And it's all part of the same piece that you have what we call phase 1 and phase 2 metabolism issues. And again, so Colleen, once again, if NAC isn't working for you, it's simply because a different part of that recycling process is actually the deficient one. It's not the N-acetyl part. It can be one of the other parts of that whole process. And you have to ask yourself the question in the first place of, maybe I'm just so deficient in it, maybe the process is so messed up that I actually have to rehab all three. Or we have to understand that there's other parts like what's called sulfation, methylation issues. There's those other things that we can actually test for and look at. Hey, why is your body exhausting this really primary system? And what I tell a lot of people, there's research that shows females, sorry, my camera got really weird and tilted here. Sorry about that. So some research shows that women, by the time they hit their mid-30s or have their second child, they are almost at 12 times lower on certain phase 1, phase 2 metabolite, like trash removal processes, than the male counterpart, because they use those processes to process through so many hormones. Because, for example, your estrogen, a normal estradiol, which is kind of your most powerful estrogen, a normal range, depending on where you're at in your cycle, is between 80 and 120 milligrams per deciliter. I mean, it's going to fluctuate, of course, where you're at in your cycle. But during pregnancy, that 80 to 120 can shoot up to 30,000. That's a lot of hormone. But guess what? That's also a lot of trash created from those hormones. And this is where it winds up, we get to start asking the question, this is why it's so common for women to start having these long haul type issues and this hair loss and this fatigue, and they just can't get it back up. One of the big reasons is your body is now basically exhausted on its ability to remove trash. And some of those trash removal processes are also the process that help you recycle certain products to boost the efficiency of your immune system. So now you feel like you have a hormone issue. You also feel like you have these COVID long haul issues, and now you're getting sick all the time and you can't really ever seem to recover. And you go to see 5 or 6 different specialists, but you don't realize that it's actually kind of different sides to the same coin. And that's something that we really try and walk patients through to help them understand that this is actually a very similar process, because your immune system is not just to fight infection. Your immune system helps you turn over cells. It helps you rehab. It helps you, like I said, that natural cell turnover. It helps you monitor. It helps you restore tissues. Your immune system's working all the time. It doesn't just ramp up for the infection party. It's actually there all the time. Let me I had system over for years, and I'm working with homeopathic Dr. Richard's help. Yeah, homeopathies are really a great thing. I've used them in the past a lot. I think at my house, I have a 1,700 vial kit. And homeopathies are really, really great because what they can do is they act like a small stimulant. What they do is they go into the immune system and they give a small exposure to the immune system or the nervous system of an issue and basically bring it to light. Because once something's in circulation, the immune system gets presented with it and it has to basically react. So homeopathies can be a really, really good thing. The reason I don't use them as much anymore, because one of my biggest things is I want to walk as far upstream as possible. And why are those homeopathies even necessary in the first place? Because I think they're absolutely wonderful. But once again, I ask another question, which is, why are they even needed in the first place? What body systems are failing to exhaust that portion of the immune system? But yeah, I am a big fan of that stuff. I've seen it work a lot. That's just, we see it happen all the time. And then Colleen, been 9 specialists, and it's been 7 months, and I'm still not getting any better. And that's, so here's kind of the thing I talk with patients about a lot. You're probably seeing some of the most educated and intelligent people there are. One of the difficulties that's happening now that the medical field is becoming so extremely specialized is that we're missing where all of those specialties converge, and that's just the basics. And that's one thing that actually made me go into alternative medicine, because my original background is medical diagnostics, research, and development, is you see that the true, what we call a general practitioner, how I define a general practitioner is someone that can take a step back, put a lot of the odd pieces together and start finding commonality between the symptoms and start treating, where the biggest bang for your buck is, not going down every rabbit hole you can and missing the underlying piece. And that's really, really why just Dr. Ben and I and the other docs, and Dr. Sherry and Dr. Katie and Dr. Steiner and Dr. Jenny, all of the docs here at F8, that's really our focus, to say, hey, look, we're not going to be your hardcore specialist, even though we're really well known for thyroid issues and autoimmune conditions. We want to be able to walk back and ask, what are the fundamental processes in the body, the basics? And this is why on that 9 panel, and on Thursday, I'm actually going to go over this with lab work for a lot of you, to understand how we can find, and actually using the same lab work that other docs use, but just understanding that we've been trained a little bit different, to actually look at blood work, and we look at patterns. So like I said, we run about 9.5 panels on someone, and I don't care as much about your specific highs and lows as I do about, hey, look, on the anemia panel, your liver and your immune system and your inflammatory system kind of showed up. Guess what? It showed up again on your lipid panel, showed up again on your blood sugar panel, showed up again on your comprehensive chem panel. It showed up again on your CBC. And even though it wasn't like major highs and lows, we can see it all of a sudden. It's showing up on 5 or 6 of your panels subtly at what we call functional ranges. Guess what? Something that's showing up on 5 or 6 different panels out of 9, guess where I'm going to treat? I'm going to start there. I'm not going to worry as much about these highs and lows, because it's a fundamental body system that caused that high and low to exist in the first place. So I'm going to start focusing in this center where that basic body system, that basic body system that went dysfunctional, that even allowed that higher low to exist in the first place. So once again, I know I've kind of gone in a big circle, but the big goal is to let people know that latent viruses, when viruses return, or when an old one is able to rear its head up again, it's basically the immune system is exhausted enough. It was exhausted enough that essentially said, I can't pick up these pieces again, or I'm going to try, but it's going to take me a long time. Rachel, I spent $1,400 on a doctor that said he could help me, started me on a detox, and nearly ended up in the ER, was so sick, had Hashimoto's herself. So yeah, I mean, yes, that does happen, but one of our big goals is to kind of work with you, is it's not just putting you on a cleanse or detox or whatnot. And a lot of times people go through these detox protocols, and while yes, I agree, kicking stuff out of the body is a good idea, your trash removal process is good, Sometimes it can't kick it out because it's actually just depleted and deficient. So there's a difference between supporting a body system and actually giving it what it needs to work and trying to pull everything out. Because sometimes you pull everything out and the body's like, hey, I was retaining some of that stuff, even though it wasn't that great, because I'm just desperately trying to get any resources I can to work with, because the body's essentially depleted. But that's where you also have to consider what's going on with your fundamental inflammatory system, what's going on with blood sugar, what's going on with the Hashimoto's, the Peyer's patch. Like, this is where you have to start understanding there's multiple systems at play. It's never just kind of, oh, it's just this one thing. This is my one thing. I detox this and I'm perfect. That's great for kind of maintaining health once you're there and you kind of just want to ebb and flow. But the process is usually a little bit different, taking a step back and seeing how many systems are affected by one or two things. And that's where you're going to have to start. So I think that's all the time I have for today. I've got to get to my first appointment with the patient. If you have any questions, pop them down below. Our staff will get a hold of you as soon as we can. But once again, the biggest thing with understanding how this latency goes back into lytic phase is simply the body's ability to monitor is now just compromised. And we have to go in and actually see what's going on with these type of issues. So I appreciate your time. Go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe. And like we said, if you have any questions, go ahead and just let us know if this piqued your interest or you have any concerns about what we talked about today. And have a great one. We'll see you.